Senator Ted Cruz, how are you, my friend?
I am doing fantastic. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled you're there, and you're already saying things where people are nodding their heads up and down, not sideways to sideways. And I wanted to ask you several questions. You're a newly minted senator. So you said a few things that I agree with heartily. You know, during the Reagan administration, Reagan decided he had to shut down the government on 3 or 4 occasions. Mm-hmm. They weren't for long periods of time, but Congress kept throwing these omnibus spending bills at him, and he finally said when they would do that, I can't sign this, and so he did it knowing full well that it would bring the Democrats to the table where they could do some things that they needed to do.
Right.
I just feel, Ted, that when we go out there and say we're not going to shut down the government, when we take all of our chips off the table, particularly with Obama, who's aggressive and ideological, we leave ourselves no options.
That's exactly right. I mean, to use a poker analogy, if you're sitting at the table with someone playing poker and they tell you, Mark, I'm making a bet right now, but if you raise me, I'm going to fold. Mm-hmm. You're going to take that person's money, and sadly, that seems to be often the way Republicans negotiate. They're not willing to actually stand up and do something, and I think we just came out of a really lousy negotiation on the fiscal cliff, and we just had a lousy deal, and we're headed into the next fight over the debt limit. The debt limit presents some real leverage for Republicans to stand together and say we either get serious about changing this situation, changing the out-of-control spending or debt, or we will shut down the government. And it is only through leverage points that we have any prayer of making progress with this ideological administration.
And as you know, Ted, shutting down the government does not mean we don't pay our debts. And I want to make this clear and to the audience, and I want to get your opinion on this.
Right.
We would continue to pay principal and interest on debt. We would continue to pay pensions that's specifically provided for in the Constitution, which is part of our debt. But the idea that general operating spending, this continuing big government spending is debt, that's not debt. That is general operating expenditures. And we have enough revenue to cover our actual debt and debt payments, right, so that the nation does not go under, quote unquote. Am I correct?
You are exactly right. Not raising the debt ceiling does not mean we default on the debt. And President Obama saying that is just fear-mongering and deliberately deceiving people. The average tax revenues for the federal government are roughly $200 billion a month. Service on the debt is between $30 and $40 billion a month. There is ample revenue to ensure that we service the debt, and any responsible president would say, regardless of what happens on the debt ceiling, the United States will always honor its debt. We will never default on the debt. But what the president did last time, and what I expect he will do again this time, is he'll try to scare people. And there's an old phrase that you know well called Washington Monument Games. And that stems from the anecdote that if you ask the Interior Department, we're going to cut 1% of your budget. If 1% of your budget were cut, what would you have to do? And the answer that comes back is, well, if we were cut 1%, we'd have to shut down the Washington Monument. You know, they pick the sort of most egregious thing that would make people scream, and they say that's the thing that would happen if you cut even a penny from our budget. Mm-hmm. What the president does on the debt ceiling is he says if you don't raise the debt ceiling, we'll default on the debt, and he suggests it'll bring about this financial apocalypse. And then the other two things he brought up last time, he said we'll stop paying the military and we'll stop sending Social Security checks. Those are just irresponsible examples, but they're Washington Monument Games. He's trying to scare people because he doesn't want to have any fiscal constraints on his spending of our money and his racking up more and more debt.
Now, this is very important what you're saying, because we not only have enough revenue each month to pay our debt and service our debt and the pension obligations, there's money left over to pay for the Social Security checks that go out and to cover the military, and the president has the power to make those priority decisions. and yet he pretends that not only won't we be able to pay the debt, but the checks won't go out. That's because those are his decisions.
Right. That is exactly right. And to show you just how cynical they are, last time there was a fight over the debt ceiling, Senator Pat Toomey introduced a very important bill. And it was a simple bill. It provided that in the event the debt ceiling is not raised, the federal government will always honor its debt and never default on its debt. That bill would have made it an absolute certainty. And what happened? Harry Reid killed the bill. He didn't want to vote on it because he wanted to hold the threat of a default like the sword of Damocles over anyone trying to rein in government spending. And it's irresponsible fear-mongering, but they're very good at it. And it's where, as conservatives, we got to get a lot better explaining this and making very clear that what they're saying isn't true. What would happen if the debt ceiling was not raised is it would be a partial government shutdown. And we've seen this before. We saw this in 1995 when Republicans in the House shut down the government. And what happened was it was a partial shutdown. There was some political cost to be paid. But at the end of the day, because Republicans stood strong in 1995, we saw year after year of balanced budgets and some of the most fiscally responsible policies Congress has produced in the modern era. If we stand strong, we can do that again, and it just comes down to Republicans. Are we willing to stand strong and face the wrath of the mainstream media criticizing us and the president saying nasty things about us?
Yeah, and the truth is, you as you know, the Republicans will get through it. In other words, it's not going to go on for 6 months or 8 months or 12 months. It'll be a tough week, 2, 3, at tops 4. But the Republicans will get through it. At that point, they'll have a good story to tell. They can explain it, how they have helped save an enormous amount of money and helped change the direction of the nation. So you got to go into this with a strategy, and then when you come out of it, with a victory.
Mm-hmm. You're exactly right, and strategic thinking, unfortunately, has not been a strong suit of Republicans. If you look at what just happened on the fiscal cliff, I think the fiscal cliff deal was a lousy deal. But the reason that we got such a lousy deal is anytime you have divided government, and right now we obviously have divided government, the advantage is whoever owns the default. Whoever wins if nothing's done, because with divided government, either side can shut it down and prevent something from happening. What made the fiscal cliff such an advantageous negotiating position for the president was if nothing got done, there was a massive tax increase on every American who pays taxes.